All right, we are live. It is May 15th, 2017. John Vogel.
My history, my life. And Stacy is recording this and she'll ask questions for clarification. I am going to use, my full name is John Vogel, no middle initial. I was born in White Rock, British Columbia, March 3rd, 1955. And that White Rock is just on the other side of the border in Canada. At the time, my parents were working farms as helping out with a dairy farm. Let's see, I don't know the name of the hospital, but as far as my blood type, I'm A positive. My color of my eyes are hazel, and my hair is gray right now, but it was brown. When I was young, I had blonde hair. As far as distinguishing birthmarks, I have just one that's on my hand, a small little mark, and that's it. My mother, her name is Marlene Rita Geyser, and she has her own story and history that she wrote. And my father, his name is Johann Joseph Vogel, but he Anglicanized it when he came to the United States, to John Vogel. Let's see, and their birth dates, my mother was born April 1933. My father was born February 25th, 1927. And both of them are, at this point, passed on. I can't remember much of my early life in Canada, but I do remember, I have some pictures, and I used to be, my older sister, Kristi, was born in Switzerland before we arrived in Canada, and my younger brother, Peter, was born in Canada shortly after myself in Cloverdale. While we're living in Cloverdale, I think it's a different town that he was born at, but that you can check in his records. Let's see, one of the stories that gets told about my birth when I was growing up, and I don't recall this, but other than it's a story, is my mother, for a time, and my father lived in the outback in British Columbia. And one of the stories she tells is about how she left Christine and I, my older sister Christine, alone for a little bit. And we, as a family, used to drink wine, and we always had wine in the fridge, and a gallon of wine, or a couple of gallons of wine. And one time, and they would basically pour a little bit of wine and put water it down, and that's what we'd have to drink when we were growing up. But I was, just as a toddler, 2 years old, my sister a couple of years older than that, we got into the wine one day, and she poured me a glass. This is the way the story goes, and I drank it, and we basically polished off a whole gallon of wine between the two of us. And my mother found us asleep by the fridge, dead drunk, and she claims that she was all frantic and everything else, but after a couple of days, I guess we woke up from our drunken stupor. But that's one of the stories I recall her telling about us growing up. In 1957, and I don't know exactly the date, but in Ancestry.com, I think there's a document that I found that indicates where we emigrated from Canada to Florida. And we traveled to Blaine, Washington, and then down to Seattle, and then took the train to Chicago, and went all the way down to Florida, which is where my family settled, near Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And I don't recall the trip. There's some, and I don't recall anything before that, no stories before that. Let's see, what else? When we got to Florida, my earliest memories that I have is of when we had a tornado down there in Florida. At the time, we were still home. I wasn't going to school, and I must have been 5 and Peter was 4. But I remember us living in one of the houses, and there was so much water that it was like a river going down the street. And we went out and played in the water. It was warm, and it was just fun. It was, now I think back on it, boy, it was flood, and everybody was concerned about the flooding. But that's one thing I remember. My mother and father at the time were still relatively young, and they were trying to find their, I guess, find a career. My mother started cleaning houses. She, at the time, was still learning English, because she never really learned English in Canada. And initially, when we got to Florida, she didn't even drive. She didn't know how to drive. But she quickly learned, and she became quite an entrepreneur. First, I can remember her making little booties for babies as a means of making some extra income, because my dad wasn't making a whole bunch of money as a dairyman or dairyman assistant, and times were kind of tough. And ultimately, she taught herself English well enough that she could be a substitute and teach in school, and she began teaching in a Catholic school. And our family became a little bit better, I guess, better off. And I do remember her, she also cleaned houses, and she started a business called Driftwood Cleaning that cleaned houses in the Fort Lauderdale and some of the swanky houses along the there near West Hollywood, even up to Boca Raton. It was right now they're very exclusive neighborhoods, and if you were to look into them. And we became quite well off as a result of that, because she had a crew of people that were working for her. And my dad helped her out with the business, but he never could get off of the desire that he wanted to have his own farm. 1962 came around. I must have been, well, so I was 7 years old at the time, and we had the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I can remember going to school, and we would be 90 miles from Cuba, and they would have us basically do the kind of get underneath our desks to protect ourselves and from an atomic bomb if it was going to blow up. And so there was those warnings all during the school. They were not fire alarms, but they were basically tests for nuclear fallout. Yeah. But in hindsight, you look back and you think, wow, if they were to drop a bomb, it would have been pointless, because we were in these mobile classrooms that would have just been like, I don't know, like cardboard boxes to atomic bomb. let's see, what else do I remember? We moved to a place, and I don't know the address, but it was in Fort Lauderdale, and West Hollywood, I'm sorry. And at that time, Charles and Rita entered the picture, you know, and some of the stories I can remember, one of them is...
They're your siblings.
Yes, yes, Charles, my brother Charles, and my sister Rita. Just recount some of the stories, and I don't remember my age when I did this, but I do remember the stories. One of them, when we were living in this house in West Hollywood, I'll tell this one first. I was in first grade, and I somehow got lost coming back from school, and I don't know where I was, but then I remember that this policeman pulled me up, or it was I guess must have saw that I was lost because of walking along the street. I had no clue as to where I was at, but I was crying and all upset. And I remember him taking me home. I'm not sure how he figured out where I was at, but that was a big fright from my mom. And like I said, that was a fright for me too, I guess, when I was only 5 or 6 at the time. Another thing that happened when we were there, I was probably 8 or 9 at the time, and my brothers and I, we had an empty lot next to us, and we would dig caves and tunnels in this empty lot, and a fort system that we would spend the entire day, or during the summertime at least, building these whatever scrap we could find. We'd basically build these tunnels and a fort system, and we'd play games out there. But the water table was so low, so we could only go about 4 or 5 feet, but still it was quite a distance for us, and we'd have a lot of fun in that empty lot. It was like having a big sand pile that you could, but it was a whole city lot. I mean, it was fun. During that time period, during the summertime, we were not always we were rowdy kids. I remember my mom when we had a caretaker because she was out doing her work, and she had a lady that had been in Auschwitz that became our a caretaker for us for a period of time, probably a year or so, and her name was Lotte, and she spoke more German than she spoke English, and it was also at that time that they stopped speaking to us in Swiss German, and my mother was encouraged by the teachers to speak only English to us at home. So it was as a result of that we basically never learned how to speak or carry on the language, our home language, because both our parents started speaking English only to us. But there's a few words that I still remember, like Rusty, which is hash browns, and the way the Swiss make it, and then a few things like Locherbecke, which is I think a colander thing for drainage, and a few words that are familiar to my ear when I hear them. And then my mom also, she swore in French, so I had a few words there in French I could also remember, but I'm not going to repeat here. When
Where'd you
we
go
were
to school?
Huh?
Are you going to say where you went to school?
Our first school that I can remember was St. Bernadette's, and it still exists there, and I've got pictures of it, and of me also in the classroom. And there must have been 40 kids in the classroom with me. I can't remember exactly, but there's a photograph in our collection that has has all of the kids there displayed. And I had a Catholic nun that was our instructor. I don't remember her name. So we went there for, let's see, one of the other stories. During the summer months when we were growing up, we used to like to play with balsa wood gliders. And they used to sell them at the 7-Eleven store down the street. And it was a block or two away from our house. And so I would go over there and I'd buy one, and we'd make our money collecting bottles, because 2 cents for a small bottle, 5 cents for a big bottle. And at the time in the United States, you got paid for the empty bottles if you brought them in. So
Exactly.
that was a good way for kids to essentially collect money and make money. So we spent our money buying these balsa wood gliders, and we would have fun playing with them. But I was frustrated on several occasions when they would break prematurely and fall apart. And so we decided, I can't remember why we started it, but we did. It was Peter and I. Have to admit, the two of us, we would repackage the gliders, the balsa wood gliders, and go back to the store and put them back on the rack and take a good one until there were only bad ones in the rack. And this all went very well. We were never caught doing it at all. We must have done it many times. But one of our friends was all frustrated because he had a similar situation, and we told him what we did. And so we went with him and down to the 7-Eleven store to trade a broken balsa wood glider for a new one, and he got caught in the process, and we ran away, and his parents weren't too happy with us, and it was not a good situation.
You corrupted him.
Yeah, we corrupted him. But so that was one of the stories I remember growing up. What else? Third grade, I remember a little bit more about third grade, because that was the year that President Kennedy died. And I remember we were at the time, my mother was teaching in a school called St. Rose of Lima, which is Miami Shores. And she used to get into her Mercury sedan, and she would drive, I think it was the three older of us there, because Christine, myself, and Peter were going to school. Charles was too young yet. And it was about 15 miles away from where we lived, but she'd get onto the turnpike and be traveling in her Mercury and going well above 120 miles an hour, because there was no speed limits on the turnpike. And so she was there very fast, and she was not afraid to put her foot on the gas. When I was in third grade, they split up. It was a Catholic school again, but they did have some other teachers. And I remember my science teacher, her name was Mrs. Parks, and I don't remember why I remember her. I just remember that she was one that influenced me in a lot of the things, made me interested in a lot of the science things that were going on. Let me think. So that takes me through to when I was about 9 years old, I guess. Any other questions you have, Stacy?
Yeah. Well, what were your mom was doing the cleaning business, but then she switched to being a school teacher?
Right.
And your dad was being a dairyman.
No, my dad at the time was running the business for her, and she was double timing. She was teaching and also keeping the books and making the business work. So, yeah, she was a busy woman. And it was about that time that she decided to change the color of her hair. She loved to be blonde, and so she changed her color to blonde, and she never went back to be anything but blonde. So.
Well, where were you when Kennedy was shot? You mentioned that.
Ah, yeah. I remember that I was at St. Rosa Lima, and I was in class, and they immediately took us all out, and we went down to the chapel to pray, and then they canceled the rest of school for the day, and that was it. It was kind of a sad day in many respects. Everybody was upset and crying, a lot of upset people, and anyhow.
Did you ever hear or talk to any of your grandparents or anything at that point, or you only communicated?
We at that time we knew of them, but we didn't. Our aunts primarily, because they would send over woolen socks and things for us, and chocolate, Swiss chocolate to us every so often. But we didn't know them at all until a little bit later when we went back to Europe. So.
Did you ever have any pets or anything that you took care of down in Florida, or was it just? I know later on in life you did, but.
Yeah, I don't recall having any pets. I remember that one thing that, I do remember a few other things. Living at that house in Fort Lauderdale, is that it was on a cul-de-sac lot, and it had orange trees in the backyard and a grape arbor. And I remember we had cats, because it was on one occasion that there was a cat or kitten had got caught up in the arbor, and I went to get it, and I fell from the arbor and broke my shoulder bone.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I never knew that.
Yeah. And so for a while there I was incapacitated.
Did you do sports or anything? Did that broken bone impact your ability to play sports and everything, didn't it?
No, that happened early on. Like I said, it was when I was 8 or 9. And all during that time, I know that both my parents are very religious. We would go to church, and I went and had my in Catholic church is what we went to, and I remember having Holy Communion, which is when you're 6 years, I think 6 years old or something like that. And then I was confirmed later on when I was a little bit older into the Catholic Church. And as soon as I was old enough, I became an altar boy, and we would go quite frequently to church, and not like just Easter and Christmas. I mean, almost at least once a week we'd go on Sunday, and because when I started becoming an altar boy, it would be during the week as well. So we were quite a religious family that way. All right. Anything else?
I don't know. I'll think of more later.
You'll think of more later, huh? Let's see what else I've got here. Let's see here.
What was your favorite subject in school, Dad? You said Mrs.
Parks.
Parks was your favorite. For that.
I liked the sciences. I liked history, and that was a favorite subject also for my dad. He was a historian. He liked history. Yeah. And
did you have an encyclopedia set at home by that time?
Yep. We had multiple ones, and that was a way my mother got into selling encyclopedias when she was a teacher. It provided extra income, and so we always had...
That was in Florida.
That's correct. We always had, we had 3 or 4 encyclopedias in our house. So we were voracious readers, and that's where we got our information. Because the internet didn't exist. We had TV, but there were only 3 channels and it was black and white TV at the time. I think we didn't have I didn't have color TV until, oh gosh, until the late 60s when we were in Australia is the first time I saw color TV. All right, so what else? Let's talk about what happened after it. In 1960, I want to say 64. I think it was 64 in October. My father, we had been all concerned about the missile crisis in Florida. My father had hoped that he could get a dairy farm, and my mother at the time finally conceded that let's go and give it another try in Switzerland. So we sold everything we had, and for a period of time we lived in a kind of apartment complex
In Florida.
in Florida that has a swimming pool. Oh, yeah, that's another little story. And that was my first experience with smoking. My brother and I, Peter, we came across a full pack of cigarettes that was laying somewhere near the pool or something, and we decided, well, we'll try those cigarettes out. And so what we did is, as dumb kids, is we didn't want to be seen smoking cigarettes, so we went inside the house and inside a closet area, and we lit some cigarettes and started smoking them, and we got so deathly sick that was the end of our smoking period, and we never touched anything since. But that was a little story that happened there.
You learned the hard way.
Yeah. But then
How long did you live in that apartment complex?
Oh, probably less than 6 months. It was just between the time that my mother and father sold the house and their business and got settled in to make a trip back to Europe. So, which we did in the fall of that year. We went back to Switzerland, and we flew, and were picked up. I'm not sure where we ended up being picked up, but I remember we were there for a couple of months in Europe, and we got to meet our aunts and our uncles and
On
our
which
cousins.
side of the family?
On both sides of the family, yeah. And that's when the first time I got to meet my grandmother, both my grandmothers. My grandmother that was in Durloff, Grandmother Vogel, and I remember meeting her, and she would make apple cider, but it was really
Apple brandy?
Yeah, well, it was pretty strong stuff. So it had already turned, and but when I talked to her son, he claims that it wasn't alcoholic. I don't know. For my taste, it had gone. But that was I remember that. I remember she was really a rough lady. She didn't she didn't have a lot. She wasn't a friendly grandmother to us. We didn't really get to know her very well at all, and she was just really harsh.
Do you think that partly was because you didn't speak the language, though, with her? Or?
I don't know. She just
the
wasn't.
personality?
She was not grandmotherly at all. It was just really harsh. And that was what I felt like when I was 10 years old or so when I was there. My other grandmother, she was married at the time to William Ravensburg, and so she was my mother's mother. My grandfathers had both passed away in the 1950s before I was born. So she was more jolly, and she actually looked a lot like my mother looked like in her later years. It was amazing how similar they looked. But she was had her own life, and she really didn't. There was no connection to us per se. It was as her grandchildren. When we stayed there in Europe, we spent most of our time at the farmhouse that my mother grew up in called Berwa. And that was up in the mountains above the little town of Bellelay. And it was during the wintertime, and I learned how to ski up there. And I learned, my aunt, grandaunts actually, they were very loving and loved us, which was very different than our grandparents. It was funny. And the ones that I remember are Freddie and Catherine, and Ida, and what was the other one? But they were a lot of fun. In fact, I remember Freddie. She was short and stubby as an aunt. Never married. None of these had married. And she would put us to bed. The boys would be at the very top of the house, in the attic. This is where we slept. And she'd come up there with water bottles that we put down for our feet warmers at night. And she would play a game and say, "Here comes the bear, da da da." There was some kind of a rhyme or something she would do. It was in German. It was a lot of fun, and she was one of our favorites. Catherine, which was the one that corresponded most with my mother and sent us chocolates and everything else, was the one that kept so close tabs with our family her entire life. Henry operated the farm. That's our Uncle Henry.
Your grandma's uncle.
Yeah,
or, I'm sorry, your mom's uncle.
My mother's uncle, yeah. And he was married. His wife was Martha, and they pretty much had their own little commune with all the aunts would work, and they were basically, my mom said they're his slaves, but I don't know. They worked as a commune on that farm, and they farmed it for 70 years. They never owned the property. It was just part of what Henry did as far as, in the 1920s, he acquired the lease originally, and worked it for his entire life. So we came to know them quite well, and that's actually where we learned a little bit to speak Schweizerdeutsch, is because of them. They'd show us around, and they'd talk to us, and we had a great winter with them. Spent, like I said, a couple of months there. And while we were in Switzerland, we also met Hilda and her kids. At the time, Fritz was still alive, and they had 5 children. And so, some of us were the same age as some of their kids, and we met them on a couple of occasions. And it's fun now to visit with them 50 years later and refamiliarize ourselves with them. But we never really, in the ensuing years that passed, we really only knew of them through their mother Hilda, and likewise Heidi. Heidi actually we met her sisters, and Heidi is the another one of my mother's sisters. She has 3 daughters, and we really never got to know those daughters at all, never. And so they were kind of a mystery to us. Yeah, we saw them once or twice while we were in Switzerland, but they never really. Heidi kind of kept them apart from us. What I remember, my dad was hoping to get the farm, the Durloff, at the time, from my uncle Alfred, who had inherited it. And as it worked out, I guess Alfred was didn't want to give it up, and he wanted to maintain it. And he basically, it's a sad story, but he never had any children of his own. He only had an adopted daughter. And it has, since the day that my dad left, it has never really been worked by Vogels. It has been now worked by other people until I think it's in the process of being sold by Alfred's now daughter, who's in her 80s and has no children. So it's kind of a sad situation. Let's see what else. So anyhow, it didn't work out that my dad was going to be able to have the farm, and so he saw an opportunity to emigrate to Australia. And
why Australia?
At the time, Australia was paying people's fares to come to Australia because there's a shortage of people in the country. So they would actually pay people to come and get started to live in a new country. And
how do you think your dad heard about that, though?
I'm not sure
in the
how he
newspapers or.
Yeah, it must have been in something in National Geographic. My dad loved the National Geographic. I'm not sure how he heard about it, but anyhow, we ended up leaving Switzerland. I don't remember any stories about Switzerland other than, like I said, I learned how to ski there, and my mom took us down to Bellelay and showed us where her schoolhouse is, which still stands there, and the monastery, and where they make cheeses as well. But I don't recall anything else from that trip. I do recall that when we left Switzerland, we left on a train. A train took us to the port of Flushing in Holland, and there we boarded a P&O liner. I want to say the Oriana. I might be wrong with that, but anyhow, it basically took us from Europe through the Gibraltar, Straits of Gibraltar, and Suez Canal to Australia.
So you were landing in Western Australia.
So we ended up landing in Fremantle, Western Australia. And it was kind of interesting. The boat itself, they had their classes. It was very English style.
How long was the trip?
It was probably close to 30 days. So I remember leaving. I remember going south, and I remember we encountered a huge storm that the bow of the ship would be going up like this and then coming down, and the waves would be breaking the top of the bow of the ship. And people were sick all over the place, and it was in the Bay of Biscay. Everybody was seasick, and I wasn't seasick. I was still holding everything down, but everybody else was. I tell you, it was the strangest thing. It was. We were wondering whether or not we were going to sink or not, because it was bad weather. Then we crossed into the Straits of Gibraltar. Everything was smooth sailing. We stopped in at Gibraltar, and then we stopped in at, I think, in Malta. And then the next stop was in there at the Suez Canal in Aden. First the Suez Canal, Port Said is what it was at the time. I'm not sure, it might have a different name now. Went through the the Red Sea, down where the Red Sea's at there, and then came out the other end and stopped in the port of Aden. And I remember at some of those ports in the Middle East there would be vendors that would come out to the boat in their boats, trying to sell you things from their boats. It was because you
They wouldn't let you out.
They wouldn't let us off the boat, I think. So, because I don't remember getting off the boat on any of the ports. Maybe some people did, but most of it was just because you think about it, it was still a lot of migration from after the war was still happening, and this was part of that migration as well. So next port after Aden was in Ceylon, and that goes by a different name now, Colombo, Ceylon, and I think it goes by Myanmar or something. It's at the
Myanmar.
Yeah, it's at the bottom of India. They've changed the names of some of these countries and places. And then after that, we stopped in, we got to Fremantle. And Fremantle...
That's in Australia.
That's in Australia, yes. It's a port city of Western Australia. And at that point, they gave us, I think, up to 6 months we would live in these Quonset huts, which are these kind of... they're like barracks is what they are, that they're left over from World War II. And they would provide us food and shelter, and with the intent that helping us to find a job. And my dad found within about a couple of months, he was able to find a job working as on a farm, a little place near Bremer Bay, Washington. Western Australia. And this was a huge station, essentially, a wheat and sheep farm, mostly sheep. And it would be working for a guy called Ronald Shearer, who had been a station manager for a number of years and had fought in the Second World War in North Africa. Anyhow, initially everything was fine. My mom was the cook. So she would cook for the Shearers and for everybody, and we were living in a house on this station.
So you didn't have to live in the Quonset hut for the full 6 months?
No. We were there for probably 3 months or so. And at that point, we had to move everything. This moving to Bremer Bay was like a 6-hour drive. It was quite a ways south from Perth, and a lot of it was just gravel road. I mean, you didn't find blacktop roads there. And this place, the nearest farm was about 5 miles down the road, so it was pretty desolate. Anyhow, my mom would be kind of like the cook for when the shearers came and for other people when they came, and she would maintain the house. Interesting things about the house is that you'd have it was a desert land, so any of the water that collected from the roof would go into these big cisterns on the side of each of the corners of the house, where it would collect the water, and that would be our drinking water. It was the first time I ever encountered a refrigerator that ran on kerosene, because out there's no electricity, so basically what they did is they designed a refrigerator, and it was that kept things cool, not really cold. There was no ice box per se, but it kind of kept things kind of cool, and that was run by a little kerosene lamp that would transfer the refrigerant and keep things cool. And again, because there's no electricity, the other thing you'd find is you keep your vegetables and stuff like that in a vegetable cabinet, where you'd have burlap covering. You know what burlap is? Okay. It would be around the whole thing. It would be a screen, and then the burlap would be sitting in water, and then it would as the water evaporated, it would keep things inside that box cold, and that's how they maintain coldness for the vegetables.
Jeez.
Indoor plumbing was not a thing, so there was an outhouse, and it was our responsibility to periodically move the outhouse or take care of it.
Lucky you.
Yeah, lucky us. I remember our first Christmas there, and there was no pine trees there, so we were able to find an old tree that a bush really that for us ended up being our Christmas tree that year. We took it in and we decorated it up with popcorn and with paper and that was what I remember for our Christmas. It was kind of a strange Christmas. Of course, in Christmas time over there, it was 100-degree weather plus. It was really hot. One of the fun things we used to do on the farm is we would go fishing for crayfish, freshwater crayfish. And we'd either do that on the river or in these dams. Like, for example, there would be if a sheep would die, we'd take the leg off of the sheep, cut it off, put it into a trap that we then throw out into a dam. And a dam over there is kind of a water reservoir. It collects water from a 5-acre plot, drains it into this kind of area which has been designed to essentially collect the water. And that's where the animals would feed from that water. But they would, and invariably there'd be some freshwater lobsters that would find their way into that, and that's where you'd end up, like I said, putting a trap in there and collecting these, what we call marron there. It was freshwater crayfish. Lovely. Loved them. Another thing, and we do the same thing in...
Your mom would cook them up for you?
Or we cook them up ourselves, yeah. What else? Oh yeah, and this is where Ron Shearer and my dad, they couldn't see eye to eye, and it wasn't, but I think after a few months, 3 months, maybe, my dad got frustrated and quit and left, and we didn't know where he went, and he took, we didn't have a car, we were stuck because everything was on that station, and this guy, Ron Shearer, ended up, my mom ended up working for him, and still as taking care of a house and also cooking for him, and that was in payment for her staying there. And my dad, we came to find out he went to look for another job and promised that he'd come back and get us. Well, several months went by and we never heard back from him. And when he finally came back, my mother said, "No, we're not going to uproot everybody again," because he didn't have a permanent situation yet for them. And so, as it worked out, we ended up staying for the end of the school year at that place, and then
at Bremer Bay.
Bremer Bay, yeah. And then my mother and this Ron Shearer became close friends, and I don't know, started to date and whatever else. And it became that he basically became the father figure in our family for a period of time. And he showed me a lot of things. I learned a lot from him, more than I learned from my dad. He showed me how to trap, catch rabbits. He showed me how to ride horses and catch ducks. We built a kind of a canoe, I should say, a kind of a big trap, which is as big as this bed here, but with a funnel kind of a system where we have a ramp where the ducks would be able to walk into it, and then they'd fall into the main part of it, and they couldn't get out. So we would catch hundreds of ducks, and
So what would you use the ducks for?
Eat them.
To eat them?
Oh yeah, yeah. So they supplemented our food, because when you're out in the middle of nowhere, you kind of make do with what you could.
Well, same thing with the rabbits then as well, right?
Yep, but the rabbits, we would eat them as well. I'd set these traps and learned how to set them all over. And so Ron Shearer showed me a lot of things. I learned a lot from him, both mechanical, how to get things running, and even as an 11-year-old boy, I learned a lot from him. My dad was absent. So we went from that place and went, at the end of that season, I guess, for one reason or another, I'm not sure, Ron Shearer lost his job there, and so we went to another place near Esperance. And
so where he went, you guys went? Yeah,
we essentially became part of his tribe. And my mom took care of him, and we kind of, we were just tagged along. He worked at an abattoir at killing animals, and I learned how to kill. That's how I learned how to kill sheep and other things, is both there at the farm and also later on from him. And then for a time we were in Esperance, and then that didn't work out quite well, and so we went to another place called Kalgoorlie, which is in central Western Australia, as a gold mining, nickel mining town. And he found a job there, and we went to school there for a while. And then he found another job. This all the while time is going on, you know. I don't know how many months we were there, but it seemed like we were changing. We were very migratory. He found another job working at a place near Narrabeen and Bruce Rock. We went to school in Narrabeen. Bruce Rock was the bigger town for going shopping to and stuff. But it was at that time that that they I should have talked about school a little bit, because we would go to school starting in Narrabeen, not in Bremer Bay. We would travel about 50 miles one way to school on this gravel road, and my brothers and I and my sister, we would read comic books. That would be the thing we would do. We read voraciously all during this time, because we'd have to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning to be there at 9 o'clock, and then again in the afternoon we'd leave at 3 or whatever it was, 3 or 4, and to be home by 6 or 7. So it was a long day for us.
In Australia, did they have the same schedule where you were off in the summer too?
Yep.
Or no?
Yep. The summer was like in July. Summer was in December, January time frame.
So you had the December and January off from school.
It was November, December, January, and school started, I think, in February. So when I started there in Australia, in Bremer Bay, I think they put me in 4th grade, and 4th grade. And then by the time I got to Narrabeen, Bruce Rock, I was supposed to be in 5th grade, but they put me in 6th grade by mistake. And they didn't realize until 2 or 3 weeks after I'd been there, and they said, hey, I was doing fine in the class, so they let me stay in that skip the grade. So I skipped 5th grade. And it was during this time in Bremer Bay and not Bremer Bay, but in Narrabeen and Bruce Rock, when we were living in that farm, that I learned more about it. On that particular farm, they had pigs and sheep and wheat. It was a huge station. There was running water, which was kind of nice, because they had it was on near one of the pipelines that fed Kalgoorlie. They had to run water 500 miles inland to feed to this town of Kalgoorlie. So in so doing, they were able to feed some of the, or at least run some water lines to some of the farms nearby. But we, what did I learn there? It was just farm life, I guess. I remember the farm that we lived on. You have to be careful because the pigs would they would get all the scraps from the nearby abattoir, so they would feed on meat, and so
don't fall in the pig
you don't
pen.
fall in the pig pen because they would have cleaned you up. We used to go hunting kangaroo on that farm. We'd spotlight them, and then if we'd catch them, or not catch them, we'd shoot them.
Weren't they pretty big?
Yeah, they were, well, some, it depended on size. Yeah, some of them were pretty big, but
But
we would.
But why would you do that when you had all the access to all the other animals? Does the taste, because of the taste?
It was like, well, there were two things. The kangaroos were eating the wheat. They trample the wheat down, and then we'd also eat them, like, you know, they tasted like venison, like deer. That was also the first time I shot. We would go because we'd be out there shooting kangaroos, we'd also shoot rabbits. So that's my experience when I'd go out. We'd spotlight rabbits and shoot them that way too, because they would poke their ears up and look at the light, wondering what it is, and then we'd be able to shoot them. It's great entertainment. All right. It was during that time in Narrabeen and Bruce Rock that something happened between the relationship of my mother and Ron Scher, and there was a complaint about him abusing the girls in some form or fashion. I was oblivious to it all, but
did you know about it then, or did you only find out about it later?
I found about it later. I was not aware of it.
So, like, when all this went down, you didn't know why anything was going on?
No, to me, I was oblivious to it. And so my mother arranged
Didn't you
for us.
call Ron Scher, you called him Bossy?
Yep. Yeah, he was the boss man. And so my mother arranged for us to, for him to drive us to Perth and then put us into a shelter, essentially, which ended up being a Catholic boys' school for me. And it was Iona for the girls. And so I spent another year in 6th grade in that particular school.
So you advanced 5th grade, past 5th grade, but then you repeated 6th grade, basically.
Yeah, under Christian Brothers. Christian Brothers ran the school. It was in Castledare, where there's a lot of issues about them taking advantage of boys. And I was, because of, I was there with my brothers, I saw less of that. I mean, they were abusive in some respects, and that they were very firm. But I didn't see any of the abuse that they talked about of others. But I could see where it happened. But Castledare was set up. They had a couple hundred boys there that were either orphans or from migrant kids that were displaced, or boys, all boys. And we would go to school every day, and at night we'd have chores and things that we would do. There was a miniature railroad that was run by a group of people as a fundraiser for the people there at Castle Dare. And what else? What do I remember? I remember stories that I remember. I remember spending summers down there by the river, and we would go catching these blowfish down on the river, and then using the tails of the blowfish as bait for catching larger fish. And that was how we spent our summers on the side of this river.
What was your mom doing while you were at school?
She was working as a nurse and as a teacher, whatever she could do. And we did that for...
But she still visited you guys, didn't she?
Yeah, she did periodically visit us. I remember... and we'd have... The Castle Dare was run like a military establishment. You know, you wore uniforms, you had roll call, you had certain days you had laundry days, and certain days certain things happened at certain times. I remember having a run-in with the matron who was over the laundry, and having to write out something. I can't remember what I did wrong, but I ended up having to write that I would something 3,000 times on a whiteboard, on a blackboard, I should say.
3,000.
3,000, yeah, lines. That was one of the punishments. Something I will not do da 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 da. I will not do da da da. I remembered, you know.
You remember saying I will not do something, but you don't.
I don't remember what it was I did wrong. No, I just remember having to write 3,000 words.
How long did that take you?
It took me quite a while because that was all I did.
Was it just you, or that got that?
There were two other people that were also involved with that, but they either apologized or something. I was hard-headed. My lines.
You took punishment.
Yeah. The Christian Brothers, they were very liberal with their punishments of students. They would use a strap or a ruler very liberally if you did something wrong and you didn't pay attention or whatever.
Did you have to have that punishment?
Many times. So, it was a...
Was it always on the hand?
No, it could be around the rear end too. Yeah. Yeah. Let's see, what else do I remember for that time? I was able to be an altar boy at that time, again, because we had services there every day. So that was something that happened.
So you had morning mass or something?
We had morning mass every day, yeah. What else? Oh, and that was the time when I was at Castle Dare that I was, because I was taller than most of the other boys, because I was a little bit older, they had me, I was singing in the choir, and they had me be the Snow White in a Snow White and Seven Dwarfs production we did, which was a lot of fun. I got to dress up as Snow White, and my brother Peter was the huntsman in that same play, and we have good memories of that. We basically took the Walt Disney version and we memorized it word for word, the whole movie, and the way we did that is watching it more than a dozen times, until we knew the play backwards and forwards, and memorized it.
Forget copyright.
Huh?
Forget copyright.
I remember walking around the football field, time and time going over the script, until I had because as Snow White, I had to know everybody's lines. Pretty much.
That was in 1966?
It was in...
67?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Because you were in 6th grade, right?
Yeah, 6th grade. Let's see. I think that's enough. Let's quit there.
That's a good stopping point.
Yes.
All right. It is Tuesday, May 30th, 2017. And we're back to interviewing John Vogel. And we left off last time when you were about 11 years old, living in Australia.
Yep.
We're going to pick it up there, I think. Unless there were anything that you wanted to cover that we didn't cover.
No, I'm thinking when I was 11 years old, we were in Castledare with my two brothers. I spent a year there in Castledare, and I think I already went through the memorable experiences there. Some teachers that I remember from that period of time. I'm trying to think of their names. Peter, my brother Peter probably has a better recall. We had one teacher, a brother that was did the music, and I can't remember his name right now, but he's the one that got me involved with being Snow White and a couple other shows that we put on while we were there at the boys' orphanage. Let me think here. I had my other teacher that was full-time. I don't know, he was a firm guy. Seemed to be pretty, I respected him. And then they had Matron Kelly. I remember her because of having written, apparently she was over the laundry, and I must have done something wrong once and ran afoul of her. And I thought myself always a very obedient person, but apparently she didn't. She thought that I was disrespectful or something, and I ended up having to write 3,000 lines. I will not do that, whatever it was. And there were two other culprits along with me, but I was the only one that finished. There was no way I was going to apologize other than do my commitment. And I did it. Spent a whole weekend doing it, and that was my memory of her. Let's see. We spent our free time swimming in the water because Castledare was located right on the one of the tributaries of the Swan River, and we would catch fish, blowfish, and also prawns, which we would use as bait. We never really cooked any of these fish. It was just more or less catching for the sake of catching fish and catching more fish. Let me think here. After I have spent a year there, my mother was in a position to, I had to go to another school, which would have been all by myself, a Christian Brothers school. It would have been Clontarf, which was a few miles away, and it would have separated us more from my younger brothers, and my mother felt it was not a good thing. So I ended up, she at that point had got a job teaching at I think at a Catholic school, and she had arranged for a one-room, actually it was two rooms. It was a bedroom and a laundry room. That was a space that was not too much larger than this room I'm in right now, that had a bed and then had a separate area where we kind of washed dishes and cooked. And at that point I was going to another Christian Brothers high school, but I would spend a day, I would go home to my mother, and that was our home. It was a Dutch couple. I think I've got a few pictures of her and her family that allowed us to live there for a while. The things to remember is the toilet facilities. That they had an outhouse, which was out in the back, back 40, away from this apartment, which was a kind of apartment actually. No heat, no cooling. It was pretty plain. And it was a special time for me to be with my mother and nobody else. And at that point I started Christian Brothers High School, Highgate. And
After 1 year of living in the laundry room?
no, it was that year when I was moved from Castledare. That was the year I started Highgate, which ended up being the school from which ultimately I consider to be my high school education from that school, because I never graduated from high school. The way I got to there was either by bike or by bus. I would go to school, and that's how I'd get to Highgate, which was in Mount Lawley, Western Australia. So let's see. I don't remember anything about that period of time other than it was time that my mother and I spent together. And then during the summertime, finally we got into a position where my mom was able to take the other two boys out of. That was the following year after that first year. She was able to take the boys out of the orphanage, Castledare. And we moved to a place, it was number 5 Madoff Street in I'm trying to think. I remember the name of the address. And I remember, right now I think it's number 7 because they changed the numbering. And anyhow, my brothers and I, it was a little 2 or 3 bedroom home, and for a time we had a great year there. I was going to school that next year with my brothers, and we would, all 3 of us would travel to Mount Lawley, which is high school, Highgate there, and we started going to school there. We played on a football team. My brother Peter and I on the Bassendean junior football league, and it was Australian rules football, which is very different than American football or anything like that. Let's talk about Australian rules football, which is kind of, I always describe it as a cross between basketball, rugby, and soccer, because the way you move the ball down the field is by either running it and bouncing it on it's an oval shape, elliptical shaped ball, or by kicking it, and in some cases passing it. You can throw it, but you can hit it from one hand to the other and pass it along to your teammate. I played defense, and so did Peter. He played in a defensive position. I played fullback, and which was as a defender, and I would be able to kick the ball probably 50 or 60 yards, which was not bad for
That's good.
my age at the time. I was quite a good kicker. Peter says I don't know. The walls were different, and anyhow, the fields were a lot larger than American football, so you can kick a distance like that. It was impressive. I don't know. I don't remember. We had a lot of fun playing that. We had wherever we went, we would go by bike or by train. There was a train station nearby that ran us, that we could run into Perth quite easily, or to Mount Lawley where we went to school. It was in the suburbs, and at that point, my mom, I don't remember exactly what she was doing, whether she was teaching or whether she was nursing. It was one or the other or both. But also at the time, I think Ron Shearer rejoined us for a period of time. while we were living at Madoff Street. And it was during that time. I also remember that we had an earthquake that kind of came through, and it was kind of like my mom was shouting at us in the front room, thinking it was us that was making all the racket, and really it was an earthquake that was happening, and which is kind of strange in Western Australia because they don't typically have earthquakes in that area. Let's see what else. And the girls at the time, they were still at Iona. They came to visit for holidays, but pretty much they still stayed at boarding school most of the school year. I'm trying to think here. Madoff Street. Oh, while we're at Madoff Street, we continued to be good Catholics at the time. I was an altar boy. The church was about 2 blocks away, and I would go every morning and serve Mass with the priest along with Peter. So we were quite involved with the church at the time. And as I recall it, it was while we were at Madoff Street that we had some missionaries that knocked on our door, and I think my mom recalls having turned them away at the time. And it was we stayed there for a year, and then there was a breakup between her and Ron Shear, and we ended up moving from there to another street, another place called on Loftus Street, 186A Loftus Street, and I think it's in Mount Lawley, a lot closer to where we were going to school. And it was a duplex apartment, brand new. And we moved there, and it was, at that point, that was the last time we ended up having interactions with Ron Shearer. I mean, he exited our lives at that point. And at the time also, we had summer times we would spend, I should talk about that, because every summer from the time when I was 11 on, I'd spend with my dad down in Harvey, spending, I don't know, it was 2 or 3 months there. It was during this hottest part of the month. And he lined us up for some jobs milking at a dairy farm. And I worked for a family, the Stanford family. And I would I'd get up every morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, go milk cows. And then after I was done milking cows, then I'd have a breakfast, and they'd feed me breakfast, and then I would fix fences, and I would drive a tractor, and which would, plow fields and stuff like that. And I remember the first summer that I did that for working for them. I came home, and they paid me for the whole summer's work, and I came home with $200. And I thought myself, wow, I was rich. I'd never seen that much money. And I went down to the bank to cash the check, and I had them put it all into $1 bills. So you can imagine how thick that looked. And it was like, it was good to have that money. I felt rich. And so when we got back took the train, I think, back home to Perth from Harvey, which is, it's about, it's a several hour drive, and quite a lot longer when you go on the train. When I got back, and I gave the money that I had from my mom so she could use it for buying school clothes and stuff like that. So I didn't need the money, so she used it.
Did Peter work too, and Charles?
Peter worked at another place and did this similar kind of thing, but I don't think he had quite... they used him more for just milking, period. He was at a bigger farm. And Charles worked at a smaller farm, and he only did the farming. He didn't do a lot of tractor work or anything else like that.
Which one was your dad working at? Any of those farms, or these were all separate?
My dad, he was at the time he was working as artificial insemination board, and he also had several acres that he managed for himself, and he also milked at a dairy farm, the Italianos, and he pretty much, worked there in the morning, took care of milking the cows, and then did his rounds as artificial insemination, and then was back in time to work the afternoon shift and do some more milking in the afternoon.
Was that where he spent the whole rest of his life, or did he?
That's how he pretty much.
That's in Denmark, right?
It was in Harvey first, and then later on, after he was able to buy the farm down in Denmark, then he moved everything down to Denmark and sold his properties.
But that wasn't when you lived with him?
No. Yeah, he moved to Denmark after we left Australia. So, or just a little bit before. So yeah, Denmark, I'm not as familiar with Denmark other than having visited there a few times before, let's see, what else? So that's the way summers work for the next two or 3 years. As I was going through school, I'm trying to think of experiences at high school, Highgate. One of the things that we enjoyed doing there was playing a game called Butty, where we would throw a tennis ball against the wall, and it was kind of like above a line, and there was a certain thing that you played each other, and you were supposed to be able to catch the ball or whatever, and it's like playing tennis, but against the ball, but with your hand. And I became quite good at that. And that's just part of the deal of being a boy, I guess, growing up. And we also at the time, this is something I remember, we started earlier, Peter and I, we started collecting stamps and got into it during that period of time quite a bit more.
At Highgate?
Yeah. Peter found a guy that was just a block up from the school where he would sell stamps and coins, and so we built up quite a collection, and for many years, probably 10 years, he and I would basically have censuses of stamps, number of stamps, and count them, and it was our way of knowing where in the world we were and where things were in the world. And so he tried to specialize in the Australian collection, and I tried to specialize in the American collection. And when ultimately we, later on in life, we divided the collection accordingly, and I think I got the bulk of the stamps, but I haven't really done anything with them since, other than continue to collect them. At some point in my life, I will probably, I don't know, we'll see. I promised to do something, but it's just a collector. It's just when I see stamps, I have to I admire them, and I usually cut them off the corner of an envelope, and pretty ones I save. I probably have, I don't know, thousands and thousands of them. Most of them not in albums, but anyhow, it was fun. It was fun collecting them when I was doing that. Let's see. We also did the same thing with coins. I have it's a small coin collection I have, but anyhow, maybe one of these days it might be of value. There's more value in the silver that's in them than probably the value of the coins. Let's see, what else? My experiences at Christian Brother schools was generally, I did not have any trouble, and yet they claim that there was problems with molestations and stuff like that. I came close to that, what may have been something like that at one point in time, when one of the Christian brothers pulled me aside and took me down to a shed or an area, and wanted to look at my private parts and stuff like that, and ended up, I never, he did that once, and that was the end of it. It was kind of unnerving, and I never saw anything happen again after that. That was my experience. So the stories they tell, I can associate with them, but I'm not traumatized or anything by it, because nothing.
Did you tell anybody?
No, at the time I didn't, and not really many people know. But when I understand. I understand that the stories that they tell, and I believe that there was some of that going on. That's all I can say, because they were taking advantage of boys. And in my case, I was just lucky it never went any further than just that. And that was scary, and I never kind of watched myself with regards to that particular Christian brother, never let myself be alone with him again. So anyhow, it worked out for me. Let me think here. What else? It was wild that we were in Loftus Street, and I was in sub-leading, is what they call it. It's 11th grade. That we came to know of the church, and I was home this particular day, and the missionaries had these young missionaries that came over, Elder Day and I'm trying to think of Elder Hayward. They came knocking at our door, and they were about close to my age, and I was intrigued by what they had to say, and them being Americans, and I thought, yeah, I'd be interested to hear a little bit more about Mormons, because I'd heard about Mormons historically, and had seen the movie Brigham Young that was about the Mormons, and had read about some of the history of the pioneers. And so when they offered to come and tell me a little bit more about it, I thought, yeah, it would be a big deal. So I told my mom about that. She wasn't home, that they were going to come on this particular Tuesday, I think it was, and it was like a Thursday, and then find out that we waited, and I got all kinds of, my mother wasn't happy with me, and she was upset.
Why was she upset?
Because she equated the Mormon missionaries with Jehovah's Witnesses, and she was didn't want to have anything to do with being proselyted to. She was quite happy being a Catholic, and not changing our lives and everything. We were so tight with the Catholic religion at the time. I mean, think of it. I was still an altar boy and still serving there, and I was going to a Catholic boys' school, and my sisters were going to a Catholic girls' school. Yada yada yada. We were very, structured, and we were religious people. So she wasn't too happy with me having them come back. So that Tuesday came, and it went, and I thought, oh, I'm glad I didn't have to worry about that. So they didn't turn up, but a day or two later, they turned up during the day when she was there all by herself, and they apologized for not turning up, and she, all of a sudden, she had a complete 100% turnaround, and she saw these young men, and kind of said, oh, these are just, they would have a positive effect on my young men, because Peter was wearing long hair, and Charles was long haired, and
you didn't have long hair?
Oh no, never had long hair. I had short hair. And so she thought this is something that would be a very positive thing to have these sharp American boys introduced into our lives. So she had them come back, and we all, as a family, except for the girls, the boys only. Girls were still at boarding school. We started to take the lessons, and they challenged us to come to our first meeting. And the first meeting we went to was a sacrament meeting. And the bishop, Bishop Fruling, is his name, he and his wife came and picked us up and drove us all the way to church, which was no small, it was quite a distance for them to do that. And the first meeting we went to was a fast and testimony meeting. And I thought, this is weird. If you've ever gone to our fast and testimony meetings, you would expect some sermons or something, but for people to get up and share their testimonies, it was weird. Let's put it that way for us. But at the same time, though, it was good because it shared. People were able to share their beliefs and with us, and I think it had an effect on my mother. And anyhow, we continued that, taking the lessons, and ultimately my mother decided to be baptized and be baptized. She was baptized on December 25th, which is Christmas, obviously, but for them it was a white Christmas, and in Australia the season it's the hottest part of the year, so where a lot of people were going out there swimming and everything else, she was being baptized, and it was a very special time for her.
In a lake or?
No, it was in what the Dianella Stake Center. They're in Perth. I think here. So that was December 25th in 1970. I want to say 1972. Yeah. And or maybe it was 1971. 1971. In any case, the boys and I, we were not of the opinion to do any kind of changes, and neither was Rita, but we decided to join the church on February 5th, the following year, just a month or so after my mom.
What changed your mind, do you think?
I don't know. I just at the time it seemed to be the right thing to do. Mom was all gung ho about it, and the more I was reading about it, the more it made sense. And I think the practicality of history, knowing as much of history that I did at the time, I could see all the things that the Catholic Church had holes through, and some of the teachings that the church had answered questions that I had always had, and so it made sense, and so I got baptized, and that happened to be also my dad's birthday on that day. It happened to be a lot of things happened around my dad's birthday. So.
Did he attend your baptism?
No, he was totally unaware of it. So, yeah, it's kind of the way it worked. Let's see, how does that work? I'm trying to think here. Because we came back, because I'd spent the summer working, and so I came back, and a week or two after having come back, just before school started, that's when we got baptized. So it was, I wasn't with my mom during a lot of this period as she was getting more used to the church. I was down on my dad's farm and working during the summer. So when I came back, though, then the feeling of going back and going back to school and going to a Catholic boys' school was a little bit awkward, because no longer did I believe everything that they were telling me. And so it wasn't very long after I got back in school that we decided that it made sense to go to a public school. And so we moved, started going to a public school, which was interesting in that I started seeing girls that in a boys' school, they didn't exist. You know, they didn't exist. However, I should go back before this here. I did have a girlfriend. Her name was...
they did exist at some point.
I know. I did have a girlfriend. Her name was Barbara Balshaw. We were dance partners because at the high school, they did teach you when you were when you were 15, 16, one of the things that they did is teach you how to dance. And so they took the boys, and then they took the girls from the girls' Catholic school that was a few blocks away, and then they would bring them together. Was that Iona or a different school? No, this is a different one. And then they would have introduced the boys to the girls and the girls to the boys, and they would teach them different dance steps because this was part of, you know, being ready for graduating from high school or whatever. One of the things was to know some social dance. So social dance classes were kind of the thing. And so Barbara became my companion, you know, dancing. A dance partner. And then we got kind of close, and I'd go out on weekends with her and her family on occasion. Her family owned a flower shop, Balshaw Florists. They were on Mount Lowly. And they took me on. That's how I learned how to ski, water ski. They had a motorboat. And I had a lot of fun there. And yeah, what else do you want to know? My first girlfriend. Did you ever hold hands? Did you kiss? We held hands. We kissed. Yes. Oh yeah. And it was during this time too. My dad had gotten me had gotten me a car. My first car was a Ford Falcon. And it was a blue, light, baby blue and Falcon. So, you know, I was doing pretty good. That's how it became the family car, because my mom didn't have a car. But it was your car? It was my car, yeah. Yeah. Let's see what else. So after, and Barbara, you know, she was Catholic too. So after I became LDS, it put that relationship on kind of on hold, because I started going to seminary. Spent that learning about the church and the scriptures and stuff like that. And I went to this, like I said, public high school, which up to that point I'd always been the top of the class. You know, first, second, third, fourth, whatever, at top of my class. And I entered this high school, and I just couldn't. The subjects were different. I don't know. There was a lot of distractions with the girls, I would say. I mean, it was really difficult to keep my mind on things. And not that I did anything wrong. It was just like, I remember the girls wearing these short skirts, and it was like, this is, you know, it was hard to keep focused. And the girls did it, you know, to attract people's attention, I'm sure. And they did. So,
But all those other kids had been going to public school for a long time, and you guys were these Catholic boys starting to go to public school.
And for us it was a drastic change. So for me personally, I went for just for some part of a semester or something like that. And at that point, having joined the church, things were starting to unfold in our family's life, in that my mother, who had been teaching in a Catholic school, found that she could no longer teach because they didn't want to have a Mormon teaching in a Catholic school. Makes sense. And she couldn't teach in a public school because those were government run, and by so doing she would have lost her American citizenship, and she did not want to lose her American citizenship. So it prompted us to make a decision of maybe what we should do is go back to the States. And so we started with that in mind, and the next part of our journey was essentially pulling together our lives so that we could essentially make that trip. So we sold everything we had. I sold my car. I sold everything of worth we had, and my mom likewise. And we bought tickets on the train to move us from Perth to Sydney, and we put a down payment on the ship to go from Sydney to San Francisco. And I'm not sure how my mother did all of this or how it was planned. I was just a little minion in the whole cog of things at the time. But we didn't have enough money to do it all. And so we, when the day came to leave, we left. And it was kind of like all hush-hush. We didn't tell anybody because we didn't want my father to know where we were, because it would have been, it was against the law, because he had partial custody of us. And my mom was trying to take us back to the States, and to do that, she needed to do it without him knowing. And so, as it turned out, we left, said goodbye to our friends in Perth. Interesting, before a couple of side notes here, the Elders Quorum president in our ward there ended up being my mission president a few years later, John Grinsiri. And so we knew his family there. It was kind of interesting. I knew their family, and so our lives were to bump into each other years later. What else? Okay, so we started off on our journey, didn't tell anybody except for those really close to us, and took the long train that ran across the Nullarbor Plain.
How many days was that train ride?
It was over a week. Yeah, it took a long time because it's such a long distance, Mm-hmm. And there was a part going over the Nullarbor Plain where it's a straight line of, I think it's 1,800 miles, and it doesn't change in elevation more than 18 inches in that whole. There's no twists, no turns. It's just straight line, straightest railway line in the world, and there's nothing to see, just saltbush. And you're not going 1,800 miles like that. If you're driving at 60 or even 100 miles an hour, it would take you a while. So, anyhow, we went across the Western Australia, got to Adelaide, and then stopped off in Melbourne, and then from Melbourne another train up to Sydney. And when we got to Sydney finally, we got there in the evening, and
this was all the kids and your mom.
Yeah, this is Christine and Rita and Peter and Charles and myself. And so we arrived there, and there was, all we had was $5 amongst the 6 of us. And I remember my mom sending Charles and Peter out to get some food, and so they went out to see what kind of food they could buy. We found a hotel we could stay at for a night, and that was it. We had nowhere to go after that, except that, you know, our stuff was going to be loaded on the ship at some point and taken to San Francisco at some point. And then, so my mom got a hold of, I think, the local bishop and was able to secure some temporary housing for us. And then we all looked for jobs and found jobs working in Sydney. Most of us worked 2 jobs. I worked at night as a janitor, cleaning toilets.
So all of you basically became school dropouts at that point.
Yep, we all became school dropouts, including Rita, who was only 12 years old at the time. And before I go there, I should go back a little bit because I'll share just a little bit, because Rita, Charles, Peter, and I were all baptized at the same time. But Christine, she did not, she held out, and she was, because she thought we were all wrong, and she had been training to become a nun at Iona. And it wasn't until the fall, which is, I shouldn't say the fall, I should say, I think it was August or September of later on in that year that we were baptized, that she finally decided to be baptized herself. And there was an elder, Lee Evans, that was involved with that, he was not an intellectual like Christine is, but he was a very stubborn elder, and he just told Christine, he said, you have to pray about it, you have to study and pray about it, and gave her I think a copy of the Book of Mormon, and was constantly after her. And I'm not sure what ended up ultimately convincing her. I think she shared their story separately, but she ultimately was baptized, and it made a world of difference the way our family worked after that, because when Christine's committed, then things get moving. So, and she was Mom's right hand at that point in time. Let's see. So we stopped off in Sydney. That's where we were at, and summarize this a little bit. And I was.
So what month was it that you landed you arrived in Sydney?
Oh, I think it was late in the year. I don't recall exactly when. I just remember it was later in the year.
So it was a couple months after Christine
was
got
baptized. Yeah. Let's see, things that I remember about Sydney. Peter remembers a lot more. I'm sure Christine does too. But
didn't you guys sent your mom?
Yeah, I'll get to that. So here we are. The bishop found us temporary housing, and we ended up finding more permanent housing in a little place called, what was it now? Oh, no, you can't remember this. It was a row house. That's where we lived in. And one of the experiences, the first thing we had to do is find jobs. And I remember going with my brother to an employment agency, and the only thing of worth that I had was a Seiko watch that I had won in a competition called It's Academic. It's televised, schools that were competing against one another, and I happened to be a winner of, I can't remember how far it went, but my team got somewhere. And so I had a very expensive Seiko watch. The only thing of value that I had. And so we went to this employment agency, and the employment agency said, well, he'd tell us where there was a job, but I had to come up with some money. And I said, I can't come up with any money, that's why I'm here to look for a job. Anyhow, so I finally convinced him to accept my watch as collateral. And so he told us where to look for a job, which we then went down to this place called British Leyland. And we, both Peter and I, we got hired on to work on the automotive line. Yes?
I can't remember. You put the key in.
Well, what are we talking about?
I'm trying to get the...
Okay.
Back to where we were.
We were Sydney. So anyhow, let's get to the British Leyland story. So we were in line for getting these jobs, and stood in line, and basically I was ahead of Peter, and Peter was listening to what was going on, and there was some older guys and younger guys ahead of us. And when I got to the line, the guy said, what's your name, da-da-da-da, and what's your age? And I told him my age. He said, oh, well, you can't be on the line, therefore, da-da-da-da. We can only pay you so much. And so, anyhow, so being honest, I told them my correct age, and they put me on the side of the assembly line. And then Peter came up, and he's bigger. He's taller than me by 3 inches, and they could see we were brothers. But Peter claimed to be older than I was, and he got put on the line, got paid an extra 20 cents an hour or something. I can't remember exactly, but because he was smart enough to give them an age that allowed him to essentially work on the line. And at the time, they didn't check there was nothing to check as far as proof of age or anything like that. They just took your word for it. So that was our first experience with British Leyland. So I started, my experience on British Leyland was I would work on the bumpers and the heater coils, the heater units that would go into the cars, and I would make sure that they were all staged and ready for the people. As the cars were running along on the assembly line, that they would be ready and they could take them and put them on. So that my job was just to make sure that we had enough of everything there and ready for them to put it in place. And then another one of my jobs was also to take care of the tires. I was sent a couple of times down to the tire area to fill the tires and put tires on wheels. And so that was my experience on the assembly line, and I did that for 9 months or 10 months or something, all the time that we were in Sydney. And we, at the same time, after we got those jobs, we were, they paid every week is what they did. It was always in cash. That's how things were done at the time. And in the meantime, Christine had found a job, and she also had found connections for a cleaning company, Berkeley Cleaning, who did cleaning at night in some of the office buildings in Sydney. So we signed up, and we became part of the cleaning crew for different buildings that they would clean downtown Sydney. and we would start work there like 6 or 7 and work until like 1 o'clock in the morning. And my job there was cleaning toilets, and her job, Christine, was to, doing all the other office cleanup and everything else. And Peter also, he had a toilet run too. So, we had our fill of cleaning toilets. When you think about a skyscraper, we went start at the top, 30 or 40 stories up, and then worked our way all the way down, cleaning all the toilets for a building. It took us, all night long.
That's a lot of toilets.
Yeah, toilet crew. So, yeah, when your mom talks about cleaning toilets, she's cleaned a lot, but I cleaned probably more.
Cumulatively.
Yeah, I don't know. That's an interesting period of my life. But so that would be pretty much all we would do is our lives revolved around working, and then going to church, because we were very conscientious people, and we would continue to go to church. At the time, the church had their block meetings, and so didn't have their block meetings like they have now. They had morning sacrament meeting, or Sunday school, and then they had afternoon sacrament meeting. So we would, the branch we were in, we would end up having a potluck every Sunday at church, and it was a nice time to get to know all the people in the ward, or the branch, and because of the way that everything was set up, there was a lot of visiting going on. Let's see. Let's just so he fills out what everybody else. Charles ended up doing being a pipe fitter during the day, and then he also did a little bit of, I think, cleaning at night as well. He was, being the youngest, he didn't do as much as what we did. And Rita, she was worked as I think she worked at several different places as a server, I think. And we did this for several months. It must have been May, because May 14th, when Mother's Day rolled around, we had enough money at that point in time to send my mother to Utah. She had made friends while she was in Western Australia with a missionary, Elder Newberry, and his mother was a single sister in Springville, and Sister Newberry, Twyla was her first name, volunteered to put up my mother for a period of time until she got her feet situated in Utah. So we had enough money to send her by plane to Utah, so that's what we did. Put her on a 747, and it's Sydney on Mother's Day, and it was one of the saddest points in my life, seeing my mother leave, and that 747 just pull away. At the time, you could go actually up there and see the planes as they were leaving. We didn't have all the deals we have now with terrorists and stuff like that, which prevented people from seeing people off. And we didn't know when we were going to see her next, if we were going to see her at all. But we had a plan. The plan was to continue to work until we had enough money to pay for our boat trip to the United States. So we continued to work our plan. And it was wild that we were there getting close to the time. I think it was in August or something like that. September. Yeah, something like that. Yeah, it would have been August or September that my sister Rita decided that she had been hoping to make contact with her dad, and he had promised that he would help her out and get back to Western Australia. And so somehow she finds her way, leaves us and finds her way down to Melbourne. I don't know how, but it's quite a distance away from Sydney. And I'm not sure how she got there. I'm not sure how we ended up finding out where she was, but that last month or so, we pretty much, Christine had to give up one of her jobs, and we had to basically watch her 24/7 to make sure that
Watch
she would,
Rita.
Yeah, watch her so that we would not, so we would, she wouldn't run away again. It was after my mother left, there was also a lady that stayed with us for a time, took care of us, a Sister Holman. She and her son, basically we provided housing for her, and in turn she washed our clothes and helped us as far as food, something like that. But most of the time, we took care of ourselves. I remember while we were there, we allotted ourselves so much money per week for food, during the week. And so what I did is I figured I could buy cans of beans and have that for lunch and not spend the more. So it cost me, 19 cents or something for a can of beans. And that would be my lunch instead of spending $1 or something. And the extra money that I saved as a result of that, I used for buying a camera for our trip. So that was what I did.
Beans.
Yeah, it was, and my brothers did likewise. They saved up. They were not as conscientious as I was in doing it, but they also did something along the same lines, because we had a certain budget we were trying to live by. So Christine, Peter, and I, we set kind of the rules of what, how much was going to be allocated and how much we needed to have, and how much people would get to spend each week for their personal things. And that was the way it is. So at the end of the week, we'd pool all of our money, and it would go into the kitty, and then she'd dole it back out, and we'd have the money we would have for the week to take care of ourselves. So that was an interesting part of our lives. We did while we were together, we made a trip down to Canberra with one of Christine's friends. And I remember a talk that she gave at sacrament meeting. It was about the punchline essentially was about potential, and it was about an egg, and she tells a story about an egg and the things that the potential within an egg and everything else. And everybody's thinking that the story goes that this is a chicken's egg. That goes through people's minds. But then at the end hatches an alligator so you never know what potential you have. And it was kind of a cute story that stuck in my mind. Let's see what else. So finally the time came for us to leave, and the Sydney, we quit our jobs, paid all of our bills for people that we had owed money from before, that we had left high and dry.
Who'd you leave high and dry? You mean when you left Western Australia?
Yeah, there was certain bills that we had not paid, and we felt like we were on a mission, as pioneers, and the Lord had blessed us so much that we were able to accomplish what we needed to do, and so we put all of our things in order. So we paid back people that we owed money to, and people that had been generous and helpful to us. And we had enough money to pay for our fares and pay our tithing and everything else. So we got onto the boats in Sydney and spent 21 days or 25 days, whatever it took, to travel from Sydney to San Francisco. That might be a good place to stop right there.
Why did you take the boat instead of taking a 747?
Because we had encyclopedias and had other things, goods and blankets and sheets and stuff. If you're moving, and the cheapest way is to go by boat, because at the time, basically you'd put things into boxes, tea boxes, and then they would load them onto containers, and then they would ship them across the sea. And if you went up by boat at the time, that counted as luggage, and that was like free. And if you went by plane, however, they counted it as weight, and you would have been charged for it. So that's why we did it that way.
But why did your mom go on a 747 instead of by boat?
Because everything had already been boxed up. Oh. It had already been, when we left Western Australia.
You already knew the date. You already had a date already.
We knew we were going by boat. We knew the Orient. We had already made a deposit on the ocean liner, and we knew which line it was. We just didn't know when. So, and they were flexible enough that they worked with us at the time. So I don't know how the particulars were at the time. That's something that my mom and Christine worked out. So, any other questions?
I don't know.
You'll think about it?
Yeah.
All right.
We'll pick this up again later. All right. It is July 10th, 2017, and we're continuing the story of John Vogel by John Vogel.
All right. I think when we last visited, we were in Sydney, and I shared with you some of the experiences that we had in Sydney. And Peter recently sent a recap of his memories about that period. So I will share with you now from that point on for the next year or so what I recall. So we ended up earning enough money to send our mother to the United States, to Twyla Newberry, who was going to put her up till she got her house and home settled for us. And that was on Mother's Day in 1974, I believe. It was one of the saddest days in, maybe it was 73. It was one of the saddest days in our lives as we left. 5 of us children we were teens, I guess, and young adults. Sent her off, and I could see the big 747 pulling away from the airport there in Sydney, Australia, not knowing when we'd see her next, and she not knowing when we would see one another. At the time, we were working 2 jobs apiece. Christine and Peter and myself, all 3 of the older siblings, worked 2 jobs, and the younger 2 worked 1 job. And we had that incident with Rita leaving us, and we having to find her. And I think Peter recaps that story in his recount, so I'm not going to go into that here. Anyhow, the time came where we decided it was time. We had enough money to make our trip to San Francisco, and there was always the intent that we would go by boat because it was the cheapest way for us to bring all of our encyclopedias and all of our hard goods, as opposed to shipping, and the freight would have been astronomical. So Peter, in his story, he didn't understand why we went that route, but that's the reason why we had everything in tea boxes and shipped it across to be picked up when we got to the United States. So we left Sydney, and it was a 21-day trip across the ocean, and we dropped into different ports. There was a lot of old people on this tour, and not very many young people. And so we had some interesting experiences. That we had a lot of did a little bit of gambling there. Peter, myself, and Charles. We found out that Australian pennies were the same size as American dimes and worked in the slot machines, and so we filled the slot machines with pennies and had a great return until we figured things out and closed down all the dime slots. So anyway, that was one of the experiences we had there. There were, I was 17, 18 I guess at the time, and there was a couple of girls that were kind of close to my age. One was a school teacher out of Monterey, and then there was another gal that was about closer to my age. She was a little bit younger, 17, and her name was Barbara. And so while I pretty much dated these girls the entire time that I was there on the boat,
3 weeks.
one of them, yeah,
3 weeks.
one of them was liked to be involved in night activities. The other one was in day activities. So I spent every waking moment playing with one or the other. And I have some pictures of those, which is in our albums. So the ports that we went and dropped by, we saw American Samoa. We saw Fiji. We saw what was the other? Tonga, and there was another place too. I can't remember. And then we ended up finally coming. We had I do remember as we crossed the equatorial region, they always have some great ceremony that they have the sailors for the boat have some ceremony where they christen or whatever the people that have never been across the equator, and the end result is everybody gets wet. So it was a lot of fun.
Did you get thrown in the pool or what?
Oh yeah, everybody got wet.
Oh.
Anyhow, at the end of the, we also went and saw. Okay, there was a what was it called down there? Polynesia, the South Pacific,
Mm-hmm.
Polynesian islands. We visited them as well. And then finally we got to San Francisco. It wasn't San Francisco. It was Port of Los Angeles, and we disembarked there to basically tour. And our next stop after that was San Francisco, and that's where we disembarked. And we got got onto an airplane, and that flew us from there to Salt Lake City. What was interesting on the trip, though, we encountered a family who he was the I guess ambassador to Costa Rica. I think his name was Fales, and he and his wife corresponded with us for a number of years after our trip, and they were LDS, and it was interesting and nice to have them. They would have sacrament meeting, and we would bring our family to that. They'd have sacrament meeting in their cabin.
On the boat still?
Yeah. Let's see, what else? So we got to, when we flew to Salt Lake City, they had to split us up from what I recall. And so only part of us, our group, made it on one plane, and Mom was all concerned that she missed part of her family. And we were on the next flight, or shortly thereafter we joined up with her, and there was a family that she had now become friends with called the Assumption family, and they were also lived in Springville. They had 2 girls and 2 boys that were similar in age to Peter, Charles, and Peter and Charles. And so they we palled around with them after we got there. And because of when we arrived, it was in, I want to say it was, school had just started, and so it was pretty much Peter and Charles immediately started going to school, and myself, I was kind of at this odd age where I was just at the right age to go on a mission. And so I visited with the bishop, and I was encouraged to go on a mission, and I had the support of the Elders Quorum presidency, Elders Quorum in our ward, and they basically helped in funding my mission. At the time, it was $130 a month, is what the cost of staying on the mission was. And I was called to the Italy North Mission, leaving in, it would have been 1974, in, I think it was April or May, something in there. I, at the time, I didn't know a whole bunch, but it was kind of interesting because I had learned Italian as one of the languages when I was going through high school, so it was not totally unfamiliar with me, and I thought that that had played a little bit in their decision in sending me to the Italy North Mission, which became known as the Italy Milano Mission. I spent that early part of the summer in the Mission Training Center at BYU. And at the time, it was individual houses that they had. It was just like a frat house. Every mission that had a different language had a different frat house, essentially, or huge homes that were left over from the pioneers, and they had rooms to spend. They had rooms there to sleep, bedding, and sweet. It wasn't fancy or anything, and then they had classrooms there as well. So everything was made up so that basically, as long as you were in that house, everything you did, you spoke Italian 100%, and we did that for 2 months until they thought we were ready to go to Italy and test out our skills. And each district, they called them, they had each district was essentially composed about 10 to 12 missionaries that were all in the same group and going at the same time. And they would learn the language, and some of them went to the South Mission, some of them went to North Mission, and some of them went to other state and country missions that spoke Italian as a base language. So there was a lot of turnover with regards to missionaries coming and going through that house. But I think it was every 2 months, 6 weeks, 8 weeks. Every 8 weeks, they would basically start off a new district and have a new group of people start. We would have a cafeteria was one that we would share. All of the missionaries from the Mission Training Center would share a common cafeteria kind of a place. So we did get to see some of the other missionaries that were going to other missions. Some of the ones that were kind of had problems getting there were like in Brazil. They were waiting for visas to get into that country. There was a long wait for some of those missionaries were there for 6 months until they could actually get onto the mission. We were fortunate. We went almost immediately to Italy. I was paired up with an elder Goff as one of my first companions while I was at the Mission Training Center. And he and I learned the language. I thought I was doing pretty good. He ended up going to the South Mission, and I went to the North Mission. And at the same time, it appears that they called a new mission president for the North Mission, and his name was Elder Radman. And so he and his family spoke Italian, but came from the southern part of Italy, and but were from Australia actually. His family had made their fortune in insulation, so he was paying for his own mission, and that's how the church kind of kept things moving along. Mission presidents paid their own way. And so when we arrived in Milano, there was the outgoing mission president was a mission president called President Jorgensen, and he was there only for a month or so before he left, and Elder Radman took over. And that becomes important because later on, Elder Radman had a 19-year-old son that ends up being my companion on later on in my mission. Let's see what else. Any questions?
Hey, where was the cafeteria at when you were on your thing? Was it at another house then?
It was at a big hall. Yeah, it was. Yeah, that was specifically set aside for a cafeteria.
And did you serve your whole mission? Are you going to say where you served your mission in Italy?
Yeah, I'll try to. Well, most of it's in my missionary journals will recount that, so I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail. I will just go through the major points. My first mission city that I went to in Italy was Como, which was in the
north of Milan.
North of Milan, yeah, and it was an absolutely beautiful city on the lake. Actually, the lake is beautiful. The city's okay, and it had lots of history and some good experiences there we had.
Did you take the vernacular up to the top? Do they have that there?
Vernacular,
Yeah.
Went to the Brunate Vernacular, and went several times up to the top. That was a nice view from up there. Let's see, what else? Well, I was there for about 5 months, and my first companion was an elder Clark, I believe, and he was from California, and I was his first green missionary.
He was training you then.
And so he was training me, yeah. And as it worked out, he was a little bit of a party person, liked to party. And there was an experience I had with him that kind of early on that was frustrating for me in one sense, but let me tell you the experience. I'm not sure what was written down in my journal, but it's one that I remember vividly. And most of what we did at that time was tracting or street patrolling, where
proselyting.
We would proselyte, yeah, introduce ourselves to people on the street, and we would talk about family home evening and how that would bless people's families, and anyhow, in so doing, you'd encounter different people, and you'd hope to set up an appointment where you could share a lesson and introduce them to the gospel. In this one situation, we encountered this one couple that invited us, and I didn't understand what was going on, but ended up being some Jehovah's Witnesses that it was clear that Elder Clark wanted to do battle, and he with the scriptures, and so he prepared himself with all the necessary scriptural stuff that he had to prove what the church is true. And anyhow, we went to the place. It was a cold, kind of a cold evening, and they ended up bringing their pastor over to help them out. And so it began, and they went back and forth, and I did not hardly. I was frustrated because I didn't understand everything that was going on. And finally, I got so frustrated, I just said, basta, which means enough. And I said, I just want to leave you my testimony. I said, I know these things are true. You can argue all night long and bring hostile feelings, back and forth, and this is not what I wanted to be part of. And I bore my testimony, and I told Elder Clark, I said, we're out of here. And I didn't realize that at the time my English, my Italian was enhanced. So apparently they listened, and I to this day I don't understand. It's like something happened that gave me the ability to communicate clearly to them the purpose of the church and everything. So it was a memorable experience. Anyhow, after there in Como, it was also my introduction to. I'd grown up at a dairy farm, and introduction to yogurt was made in Italy there, where the missionaries weekly went the trip to Chiasso, which is the border town in Switzerland. We'd cross over the border, and you'd have to show them their passport, and then we would go there, go to the supermarket, and buy chocolates and yogurt and oatmeal, which are the key things that you need to have, are provisions. And anyhow, I'd never had yogurt before, and for me yogurt was curdled cream, and I'd seen plenty of curdled cream, and there was no way I was going to have any. So I went, and the elders were insistent, and I bought one little container of yogurt and granola that they also bought. And then I brought it over, and then I realized how good this stuff was. The next time I loaded up, it was definitely not the way I remember the plain yogurt that we had. It was not.
Was it flavored?
It was flavored, and it was yummy. Swiss yogurt is just very good. So that was my introduction to Swiss yogurt. I think that's about it. That was my first city.
Okay. We can stop it there.
Yeah.
All right. It is July 20th, 2017, with John Vogel again, continuing the saga of John Vogel's life.
It's a long saga. You want?
Yep.
Okay. Going through my missionary journal here, I have a lot of information. 2 years I wrote this my significant events chronologically, my travels. I'm not going to necessarily go through everything, but since they are already documented, but some interesting people and places and things, I'll kind of recount those as much as I can. Am I turning up okay on there?
Yeah.
All right. So we got to to Provo, and my mission was I was helped out by my Elders Quorum presidency, and the Elders Quorum helped me on my mission, and it wasn't expensive at that time going to the mission. They at the time going to this particular mission, they charged I think it was $150 or something like that.
That's what you said last time we talked.
Yeah.
You talked about it a bit in
Yeah.
the row house that you lived in.
Yep. So it wasn't very expensive, but families at the time were required to pay their own mission. There was no standard amount that you're required to pay, like what we're doing now in the church. So some people were called to expensive missions, some were called to less expensive. Thanks for myself, I was least expensive mission, which was fun. Let's see what else. I was not a very successful missionary on the whole. As you were thinking about the numbers of people that you went and visited, and one of the important things I found after my mission is that we kind of flooded the market or the area with books to spread the gospel to all the people there. And just like anything else, it was kind of people that blazed after us that came to find and learn of the gospel, that they became, the church grew as a result of that. And so that was a good thing. So there's a few people in here that in the book will talk about ordinances that I performed, but not a whole bunch there. I had an opportunity when I was called, I think I already went through this, called to the mission, Italy North Mission, and my brother Peter was called to the same mission. And
You didn't talk about that yet.
I did not. Okay, well, he was called to the same mission about a year after I was. And but in that process, it was a process where they basically were dividing the Italian North Mission into two missions. The Italy North was split from Italy Padova mission and Italy Milan mission. So one mission became two missions. And one of the great things for me is that my new mission president for the new mission presidency was Elder John Vogel, and he was my elders quorum when I left Australia. And he wrote a book and that recounts the exploits of his family when he was there for 3 years. And then the way it worked out, Peter was only in my mission for a few months, and they divided that mission, like I said, and he ended up being in the Italy Milan mission. They separated the two of us. I think it's just as well, because we would have been quite a pair. And so at the time, I was serving as as a district leader, I believe, in the Bologna area, and Peter was serving, I think, in Milan at the time. We got close to being together several times, but never served in the same area. And then
You did run into him though, didn't you?
I did, yeah. At a district meeting, we ran into each other at a meeting, a district conference. I think it was in Torino, and when he was serving there, and it was a good get together for us to get together as brothers. But then I was called then to be the branch president for the Bologna branch. No, not the Modena Bologna branch.
Moldova?
Modena.
Modena.
Yeah, that place is famous for building Maserati cars and the Ford De Tomazos. So those are kind of famous cars. You see these fancy cars that were, at the time, I think they were selling for $60,000 or $70,000. Now it's probably 4 or 5 times that dollar amount. And so it was interesting at the time serving there. I had good memories of working with the branch and being the branch president. Some interesting stories were being a branch president, I had to learn how to run what was like a ward, never having really the experience of being a bishop, for example. That's what happened. And so some of the learnings I've had there was like, I was responsible for, planning out sacrament meeting and calling people to callings. And one thing that we did at the time, I didn't think anything of it, but but we had, the church itself served a lot of women in the ward, and the instructions from the church was that the men should lead the opening prayers and closing prayers and sacrament meeting. Well, we didn't have a lot of men, so I had the women give the opening and closing prayers and sacrament meeting. And that was, after the first meeting I did that, they came up to me and said, "You're not supposed to do that." And I said, "Well, that's what I want to do, because we have so few, people that were able to do it, that held them up because of priesthood." And so, not knowing that the church policy at the time that they wanted to have men say the opening and closing prayers in sacrament meeting. But it wasn't the end of the world. So it came to be later on that I ended up, church changed their ways, and they started doing what I was doing. And that was it was a small change on behalf of the church. Let's see what else. I think turn it off for a minute while I gather my thoughts.
All right. Mr. John Vogel.
Okay.
The first question is, where are your roots? Do you feel strong ties to a particular place, either because of your own personal experiences or your ancestry?
My roots. Always liked the Northwest. I was born in British Columbia and wanted to come back to the Northwest in the worst way as I was growing up. I remember having history lessons about different places in the world where the geography was nice to live at and in a temperate climate, and that was the Northwest. That's when I had the opportunity to decide where I wanted to have a career. I had originally put my resumes out to some companies in other parts of the country, but most of them to the Northwest, and that's kind of where we ended up living where we live. So there you go.
What was your childhood home like? If you moved a lot, was there one house that felt most like home? And what made each residence feel like home?
I don't remember a lot of the homes early on. I remember the house we lived in. We lived out in the outback on a farm, and those were memorable. I remember living, well, that first one, it was, I learned how to catch ducks and trap. We were on a wheat sheep farm. It was in the middle of nowhere, 50 miles away from the school. And that was when my mom and dad split up. There was a time in my life where we were in a different school district or different school every year. Or sometimes twice a year we'd move. It was really difficult. Then I remember we were on another wheat and sheep farm. Well, we went from that place near Bremer Bay to another place near Esperance for a few months, and from there up to Kalgoorlie, where we lived at for a while. And then we went from there to a place called Narrabeen, close to Bruce Rock. We lived on a farm again, and it was a pig farm along with wheats. I learned how to trap rabbits there, and let's see what else. And then at that point, my mom ended up sending us to a boarding school, Castledare. So I spent a year there. And then I spent a year with my mom, living in a one-room laundry room. It was near Perth. That was very memorable. We had just a bed that we shared, and the laundry room was, that's where we bathed, is the laundry room. It's no bigger than, no bigger than, well, heck. It's just
10 by 10?
Yeah, 10 by 10 total. There's a bedroom area. The only thing it could fit is a queen-size bed in there. And then next to that was a small place where there was a kind of bath washroom. And we cooked everything we had on a frying pan, because that's the only thing we didn't have an oven or stove or anything like that. And the toilet was outside. It was an outhouse. That was what I remember. We lived there for a year. And then after that, my mom was able to get a house on Madoff Street in Mount Lowley. It was number 5 Madoff Street. Now I think it's number 7. They changed the street number. I remember that one. And at that point, my brothers were able to join me, and we had a regular home for a while. And then the missionaries came and knocked on our door, and my mom turned them away. Shortly thereafter, then we ended up moving to another place. I'm trying to think of what the name is. It's closer to where I was going to school, and it was a duplex. And I have a picture of that. I can't remember the name of it. It was, anyhow, at that point, we lived in that house for about a year, and that's where missionaries tracted us out again. We joined the church while we were there in that house. That's a long story.
That's a lot of homes.
That's a lot of homes, but all of that happened within 4 or 5 years, I guess. Because by that time I was about 17.
As a child, did you have a home away from home?
No.
friends, grandparents, or?
No, never really did. Unless you count my dad's farm, where we spent summers working, and he had a home there near Harvey that we stayed at, that he rented, and but it was really not a home. It was a house.
You kind of answered this already, but in childhood, did you share a bedroom with siblings or have a room to yourself? What kinds of things did you collect and display in your own little corner of the world?
Oh, I always shared a room with my brothers, always, except for that time when I was with my mother. As far as collecting, my brother Peter and we collected coins and we collected stamps. We read lots of comic books. Those were the things that we did when we were growing up.
What kinds of comic books?
Oh, well, at the time it was very popular. It was the wars. They had comic books about the war, Second World War. That was really popular. And we had the Mickey Mouse, and we had the Marvel comic books. But we were voracious readers, and so we would just had nothing better to do because we didn't have TV or anything like that. So what you did is you read an awful lot. Comic books was a good way to do it, and stamps was a good way to understand the world. So that's what we did.
Where did you go the very first time you moved out of your parents' home? Did you have roommates? Did you live on your own? Did you get married right away? Tell the story.
Well, it kind of depends on how you want to look at that. When we were actually coming back to the States, and it was just kind of the reverse situation. We sent our mother to the States, and we as kids, oldest being Christine, she was 19, I was 17. Peter was 16, and the other one's younger. We worked for a year in Sydney, Australia. So it was kind of like that was the first time we were all by ourselves, and never, not with our parents. But it was a reverse situation in that we sent her off. One of the saddest things in my life was to see my mother leave on Mother's Day. I think it was 1972. Remember, it's Mother's Day. See her take off in an airplane. We put her on a 747 airplane, and the airplane pulled away from the airport. We didn't know whether or not when we were ever going to see her again. But we eventually were joined up together. The next time was when I left on my mission and to Italy. That was, it was a non-event at that point because I'd already pretty much lived by myself and with my brothers and sisters.
How many different homes or apartments have you lived in throughout your life? How many different cities, and what have you gained or lost in each of those moves?
Lots. I don't know how many times we moved. It was, I think the moving, as often as we did, we never really, at least I never really had any other friends other than my brothers. And that's it, because we knew so often there's no time to make friends.
What about as you were older, though?
And as I was older, I pretty much lived in the same area now for the last 34 years. So
You put down roots.
I put down roots, yeah.
Besides home and work or school, where do you spend most of your time? And why? Besides home, work, and school, where do you spend most of your time?
I don't know how to answer that. I'm at home all the time now. Home is where I like to be.
You want to pass that question?
Pass.
Okay. Do you have a refuge from the stresses of your life? Where do you go to find peace and solace?
Oh gosh. I go home. I used to be able to just go out on my property here. Coming home, driving up County Line Road, I think, oh, here's my oasis. So that was the way I felt. Like whenever I was coming from work, it's my little oasis away from everything, all the other turmoil of life.
Is the barn your oasis?
No, just home here.
Can we go to the next question?
You can do whatever you want.
Ooh, this is fun. What do you love most about where you live now? What would you change about it?
I like that it's quiet. I like at this time of the year. I love it when it's springtime and the trees start to blossom out and things start to grow. It's my favorite time of the year is springtime.
What would you love most about it? What would you change about it? That was the question.
What I'd change? Oh, I don't know what I'd change. I probably would want to have more time. Okay.
Can we go to the next question?
Go ahead.
What city do you consider your hometown? Is it the city of your childhood, the place you live now, or somewhere else? If someone was to ask you where your hometown is.
That's where I live right now.
Edgewood, Washington?
Yeah.
If it's true that home is where the heart is, what are the barest essentials you would need to make any place a home?
The barest essentials, happy
If it's
life.
true that home is where the heart is, what are the barest essentials you would need to make any place a home?
Happy wife.
Oh, I thought you said happy life. Happy wife.
Happy life. That's right.
So, Mom.
Yeah.
Do you know where you'd like to be laid to rest one day? Will you be buried near relatives and ancestors? Or in the place you lived most of your life?
Oh, I think right now I'm considering Woodbine. Puyallup, where my family's at.
That's it. You're done for today.
I'm done for today. Did I record it?